Hi, everyone. Morning. It's a pleasure to meet everyone here. So, Omo, thanks for the introduction. So, I'm here to speak on startup funding, right? Background, just in addition to what Omo said, I'm currently, as of 1 month ago, Director of Legal for Africa and West Africa Investment Manager at Renew Capital. So Renew Capital is an American investment firm, but our focus is investments in Africa. We actually started in East Africa, primarily Ethiopia. We then moved to Rwanda, Uganda. We're now in Kenya. We do some work in Zambia. And now our goal is to expand into West Africa, primarily Nigeria, Senegal, and Ghana. Um, so my role there is essentially, pipeline management and then ensuring that deals, from start to finish, we get to close those transactions. Our ticket sizes are typically what I would explain at some point from, so I wouldn't really call it pre-seed, but maybe at some point from seed, to when you are trying to get ready for a Series A, which I would also explain, right? So before I joined Renew in September last year. I used to be a partner at Detail Commercial Solicitors. And at Detail, I did a lot of finance work. So debt finance and equity. So in debt, I did a lot of project finance, banking, so corporate finance, project finance, and I did a lot of structured finance. So originally, my background is in finance, right? But later on, I morphed into you know, advising startups and then funding for startups. So beyond startups, I do finance generally. Um, so in my career so far, not so long, I've probably done a combined deal value of over 2 billion US dollars across all of these areas that I've mentioned to you, including project development as well. So what I'll be doing today is essentially just sharing my experience over the years as I've documented in these slides. And typically I like conversations like this to be interactive, right? So I'll be asking questions and I'll try as much as possible to make this very plain vanilla language. Do we have a deal? So I'll be asking questions. If I like your face, if I don't like your face, it doesn't matter. I'll ask you questions. All right. So Um, I'll start by, what do we know about startup funding? So there's this trend now. Everybody likes tech. You know, tech is the in thing, right? You see founders taking pictures with T-shirts, with nice inscriptions, with boldly written inscriptions saying that they've raised $2 million, $3 million, $500,000, and then you hear many terms, ascribed to that fundraising, right? Series A, Series B, pre-seed, seed, and I know a lot of you perhaps have Googled what those things mean, right? For those who have experience, you probably know what they mean already, right? So what I'll be doing here is essentially discussing startup funding. What does it mean? How do you position yourself to receive funding, right? What are the things you need to do? The position of lawyers, the role lawyers play, right? And then understand from startup to stock markets, right? Uh, so we'll try and do that, journey together. I'm not sure you can see this very well, but this is just to set the tone, right? So that we sort of have an idea of how integral or important funding is for startups, right? The lifeblood of every startup is essentially about its ability to raise capital, right? So how do you raise capital? How do you use that capital, to stimulate growth, right? So growth in terms of operations, growth in terms of scope, growth in terms of jurisdiction, right? Manpower, etc. So what I've done here is to sort of bring out, facts and figures to help you understand the pace at which the startup ecosystem in Africa and particularly Nigeria is growing, and the place that Nigeria holds in terms of the number of deals that are being done, how much is being raised, right? So this chart essentially tells you what has happened in the past year. That's 2022, right? And it's an African investment report, right? That I called from. Um, it's something Bridges. I can't remember the first. It's here, but I can't really see, right? So there are very key figures that you need to look at, right? So 75% of the deals that have been done, right, in 2020, that were done in 2022, were done in Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, right? Those are the big markets. So Nigeria and Kenya, right, are actually the biggest markets in terms of deal size and deal volume, right? So what does that tell you? That tells you that a lot of activity is happening in this space, and they obviously would need lawyers for these transactions, right? So I've done this so that it sort of opens your eyes to understand that there's an opportunity for lawyers, right, in the startup ecosystem. There were 975 plus deals announced, right, including those that were closed, right? Then there is the recent trend when you see impact investors, who are looking to invest in certain types of companies with certain criteria, right? You see that 4.7% of the deals of funding received went to women-led businesses, right? So this would typically have come from impact investors. So I think total deal value in terms of those closed 4.8 billion US dollars, right? And then you see that a lot of these deals are denominated in USD. Did you realize? So I would explain how your structure, right, facilitates receiving FX funding, particularly USD at some point. Anyway, so what I've just tried to do is to set the tone so that you see the figures, right? See how huge these figures are, right? Irrespective of how bad the economy is globally, right? And some of the bad news that you hear with respect to tech companies, right? There's still a lot of interest in Africa, right? There's a lot of interest in certain key countries, right? So I'll call those countries first tier countries where tech funding goes into, right? These ones here. And then you have new developing markets. So I'll call them second tier markets. And a lot of them are in the Francophone countries, right? And then you have some in East Africa as well. And to a lesser extent in Southern Africa, right? So there's actually, an opportunity for lawyers. And this opportunity is not really restricted as per your jurisdiction. Again, I'll come to explain that, right? So you shouldn't just look at the market from the point of view that you're a Nigerian lawyer and perhaps you're restricted to just Nigerian startups, right? You would also see that Nigerian startups are not only in Nigeria but in other countries as well, right? So there is a multi-jurisdictional approach that you should take as lawyers when you're talking about startup funding. Okay, so have we successfully set the tone for the conversation? So you'll be assessing me. So I'll be asking you after every slide. Does it make sense for us to proceed? Okay. All right. So now that we proceed, Expo is on the board. Please, can you tell us what you understand by startup funding?
Good morning, everyone. From the little knowledge I have about startup funding, I think it refers to the finances that you need to start up a business.
Yeah, it's as simple as that, right? It's essentially the act of raising capital to support the growth of a business venture, right? So the question then becomes, what form of startup funding do you want to resort to? Do you want to use, right? And for you to come to that conclusion, you must understand the different sources and kinds of capital that you can raise, right? So irrespective of your size as a startup, you need money. You can't run a startup. You can't build a startup without money. It could be personal cash, like money you've saved. You want to start your startup with, right? That's typically pre-seed. You could have raised money from friends and family, to start up. But typically, right, in the business world, what are some of the sources of startup funding? So you have small business loans. You could take a loan, right, for your startup. You get this from like commercial banks, cooperatives, MFBs. You know, a lot of people will use MFBs if that works for them. If you want a loan, um, what's more common is that you see startups in either incubators or accelerators, right? They help you to grow your startup. So there's a difference between an incubator and an accelerator. Who knows the difference? I heard some people who said they've worked at startups or they are working at startups. So do you know the difference between an incubator and an accelerator? Okay, so huh? You want to try? Okay.
An incubator program helps you grow your startup idea, teaches you how to run your startup as a business, while an accelerator program helps you expand your business. So you already have a startup, you're already making money, but it just lets you expand. Thank you.
If you go. So yeah, that's correct. So essentially, right, the incubator, what you do at the incubator is, you're a group of people or one person or two people, you have a fantastic idea. You've sort of thought about the idea from start to finish, right? But you need somebody or a group of people who have experience in this sector. So what they help you do from the word incubate, right, is to help you build that idea, right? At that point, you don't have an MVP, right? You don't have a product yet, right? But you have the idea. So what they do there is they help you to build that idea, to grow that idea, right? In many incubators as well, they help you with your legal structure, your business structure, right? So a lot of incubators have lawyers that work with them, right? So that's the incubation period from the meaning of incubate, right? Then an accelerator is different. Accelerator is, you already have a structure, you have a product, you've tested your product, right? But you need an institution or a group of people to help you accelerate. So accelerate means to grow that idea, to grow that product, the business, right? To take you to another level. That's where you use accelerators. And a lot of times the accelerators do a fantastic job of helping you to fund. So two things, they can help you fund in some cases because they have some funds. Two, they can help you package, for want of a better description, package yourself to be able to receive funding from different kinds of investors, right? So you can do bank overdrafts, very unlikely. You can do business grants. Business grants are very, very common, right? So a lot of people will tap into grants that are being provided by development agencies, right? So these development agencies will have funds that they want to deploy, right, towards certain areas, startups. Some of them are just, we want to help eradicate poverty, and the only way we can do that is to stimulate the SME ecosystem, right? So that the more businesses you have, the more jobs are created, the more people are taken out of poverty. You understand, right? Things like that. Some of them have grants for women-led businesses, like I said. Some of them will have grants for startups that solve a particular need, right? Climate, etc. Then there's crowdfunding. So crowdfunding, as the name suggests, you know, just go online, just beg people, stuff like that. That's crowdfunding. But the very common ones are. So can we go to the next slide? So these are the common ones, right? Angel investors and VC. So these are the ones you can look at them, on the slides when they share them with you. But I'll just concentrate on those two because that's what you typically find for tech startups. So now we are going specifically into the tech ecosystem. So you have angel investors. Who knows what angel investors, who they are, or what the term means?
Okay, angel investors are high net worth individuals who have money to invest in growing businesses for returns.
Yeah, so they're typically HNIs, that have a lot of money and just want to invest. Beyond that, which is the generic understanding, right? A lot of times, angel investors are former founders, as you would find, right, in the tech ecosystem. So there are people who perhaps have, uh, you know, they started a startup, started a company, right, and then they've grown that business to the point where I would explain they exited like sold their shares sort of, but retained their bits just to be in there, right? But they've done their bits, you know and they've cashed out and they've gone out, so they have a lot of money, so they keep going from one idea to another, one idea to another. They become serial angel investors, right? So a lot of times that's what they do. um, So one very good example back home here in Nigeria is who knows of Adela, used to be Aboyeji. Yes, he's he's an example of an angel investor. There are many others, but I mean in the tech ecosystem is one of the top guys there. So then there's venture capital, right? Who knows what VC is? Everybody has heard VC. So I will ask everybody knows what VC. You're looking at me. The lady with a smile, but she's frowning.
Okay. I really don't know.
Who has an idea? Does your partner, does she want to help you?
Let's ask Michael.
Oh, Michael?
Yeah, Michael. Maybe you are in tech, small, small. Uh, Prove yourself.
I might be wrong, but I believe venture capital, there's like, will I say organizations that are into funding startups, most likely because they have backing from bigger, like fund, how like,
Yeah, so essentially that's the idea. So simply put, right, a VC is a firm that, aggregates funds. So they just pull funds from people, right? So it could be people, it could be other funds, right? But then they have a fund. So that fund could be perhaps they raised a fund of like 20 million USD, right? And the tenure for that fund that they've raised has a lifespan of like 10, 15 years, 5 years or whatever, right? So they have a mandate to deploy those funds into startups and businesses, right? So the objective of generating returns within that timeline. Essentially, that's what this is. Next slide, please. And please, if you have any questions as I go ahead, please do not hesitate to ask me. Okay, so I have this short video that will explain, startup funding. Very short. I want to play to sort of just to give a broad overview, right? And then at some point I might stop this video and then take it up from there. Is that fine? All right. So please listen very carefully. I know there's some mathematical things in here that lawyers don't like, but I will try as much as possible to explain it. Because when you do this, startup funding, there is a bit of mathematics involved, no matter how, little.
You need a structure, a legal structure. How much will that cost you? In the US, incorporating a company will set you back anything between $25 and a few $1,000. That's in part registration fees, which largely vary depending on where you are, and legal fees, which vary depending on how fancy you need your first shareholders agreement to be. Your incorporation turns out to be on the pricey side. Also, you need to rent a server in order to develop your product. Therefore, you decide to collect some other people's money for it. This early in your venture, who on earth would give you their money? You will get it from family, friends, or by crowdsourcing it. Usually, a leading corporate company issues 100,000 shares, which are equal pieces of ownership. You need to decide who will get how many of those. You agree on 40,000 shares, or 40% of the company, for each founder, and 20,000 shares, or 20% of the company, for a well-off family friend who buys them for $50,000. It's called an investment, and at such an early stage in your startup, it's called a seed investment. The money he pays now belongs to the company. If the company fails in the near future, which statistically speaking is the most likely scenario, you will probably never see a dime of it again. $50,000 for 20% of the company puts the value of your enterprise at $250,000, which puts the value of your 40% at $100,000. Not bad. Please sign here. Congratulations, you incorporated your company and finished your seed round of investment. A year has passed. You're having a successful beta trial with customers. Time to hire a few more people. Rent not just a server, but a small office space. The $50,000 of seed capital only got you so far. Time to collect your first big round of cash. You will do this in a so-called Series A round. You're looking for an investment of $1 million. This time, you're contacting angel investors and venture capitalists, also called VCs. VCs are people who work for venture capital firms, which raise venture capital funds. They take other people's money, which they then invest into young, risky companies, such as yours. Angel investors are individuals who professionally invest their own money into young companies. Often, they successfully sold their own startup many years ago and are now looking to support early ventures. You contacted a few VCs and angels. Some of them you found online, some you got in touch with via friends and colleagues. You sent them mail. You sent them a business plan. Usually, they don't care much for the business plan. They want to see if the team is it competent, the idea, is it special. They know it's not easy. What have you already achieved? Is it promising? What could you achieve? Can you dream big? You set up some Skype calls. A bit of small talk, a lot of business talk. Describe the vision. Easy. You've done it countless times by now. They ask you tough questions. Have you heard of that other startup which does a similar thing? How are you different? You spark interest. You have second calls. You have third calls. You meet them in person. They might invest. Time to talk valuation. There is pre-money valuation and post-money valuation. The pre-money valuation of your startup is how you currently value it. The post-money valuation is the pre-money valuation plus the investment you are looking to collect. This is usually the one that you reference when you negotiate, because the investment divided by the post-money valuation equals to the investor's share in your startup. Investors want a low post-money valuation to get more for their money. You want a high post-money valuation to keep a larger share. You suggest a post-money valuation of $8 million. For the investor who would put in $1 million, this would mean a 12.5% stake in your company. A few weeks down the road, there are two offers on.
Okay. So that this part is getting to the very technical part. So I'll discuss what you would have watched here when we get to documenting for your startup funding when you're raising. But I mean, for the first few minutes that you watched, does it sort of give you any information? Is there anything that you gleaned from this generally? What did you understand? Or it just seemed like Greek? Assuming nobody understands Greek here. It was a bit mystical, right? No? Pretty straightforward. It's perhaps one of the simplest videos, that you find on YouTube that sort of explains startup funding. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So, what I'm trying to do is what you've heard, right? While it might not necessarily make sense now, right? I hope that it will make sense by the time we are done with this session, right? So, for learning purposes, perhaps it's just somewhere in your mind, in your memory. Then, as I speak, it probably will begin to make sense, right? So, as a lawyer, you need to understand the stages of startup funding, right? Um, this is not necessarily for only the guys who are investing. Have what you call a registered agent or something. There's something they call them. So that's the address you use, just to receive correspondence, etc. Um, and ultimately, the reason why tech startups are doing this is a lot of the investors that would fund startups, especially in the tech ecosystem, are from North America, right? So naturally, investors will be more comfortable with a jurisdiction that they are familiar with, right? Both in terms of how the corporate structure works, um, the governing law that would apply to the contracts that you're going to draw up, right? So there's that familiarity. So you want to make it easy for them to invest. As we would also see, the instruments that they use for investments are perhaps more suited to those to that legal environment, right? So that's why they do it. So essentially, you're positioning yourself again. Look at it, right, to receive funding. So you're thinking about it at the beginning to say, at the point where I'm setting up the structure, how am I setting it up so that at the point I'm talking to investors, these things are already there, right? So it makes it easier for them to say, yeah, fantastic. I mean, want to invest in you because this structure is already there, right? So you then say, you know what, I want to do this structure. So what you do is you incorporate an entity in Delaware, right? That entity in Delaware, as in the case of Nigeria, would then hold all the shares in the Nigerian startup that you've set up. That Nigerian startup will be the operating entity, so doing the operations within this jurisdiction. But that offshore entity holds all of the shares. So what you then do is that the shareholding that you would have had at the Nigerian entity, you take it up there, right? So all the shareholders that would have been shareholders in the Nigerian entity will be shareholders there, right? Another thing that it does for you is that it helps you expand very easily. So what do I mean? So by the time you've done your Series B or whatever, right, and you want to enter into new jurisdictions, and for example, you want to go into Kenya, Rwanda, Kigali. Kigali is new tech hub, Nairobi, stuff like that. You would just ensure that that offshore entity, right, then holds all the shares, again, subject to local laws in those countries, right, holds the shares in those entities. So what you've done essentially now is you've created a business structure that helps you to expand very easily. Does that make sense? So it helps you to expand very easily. So as opposed to, so let's say the four of you are shareholders. So we didn't have this offshore entity structure. Four of you are shareholders in the Nigerian entity. So you want to go into Kenya. You go into Kenya, you set up an entity. Four of you have to be shareholders there, right? You do it in like 5 countries. How does an investor invest in your company? Would it, invest in Nigeria first, do documentation, go to Kenya, do document? It becomes a laborious process, and for them, they don't have visibility on, valuation, the value of their investments in you. In some cases that I would explain, when there's a conversion that needs to happen, it becomes messy because you convert here. How do you decide how much you convert here, right? So it becomes very messy. So for ease, it then helps to have this structure. I know there are some people online, so in case there are questions, please just let me know as well, or comments. So another thing that it does, I know you learn about IP, and things like that. Also, is that sometimes you can centralize ownership of IP assets, right, in the offshore entity. And then when you receive funding in that offshore entity, you can then use it for operations in all of your jurisdictions. So there are a lot of advantages, that gives you. So if you're an investor and someone comes to you and says, oh, I have this fantastic structure that's been done already, and these are the advantages for us as a startup, doesn't that, show that you're investment ready? There's a lot of value that you're adding. You understand the ecosystem, right? So if you're a lawyer, right, and a startup just comes to you, again, some of these startups some of the founders are sophisticated enough to know all of these things, A lot of times they are not, right? And they come to a lawyer and say, "Oh, just help me incorporate now, sharp, sharp." That's the usual incorporation, and you just want to collect money, sharp, sharp. You do the incorporation, and then the guy realizes down the line that, oh, my lawyer didn't even advise me that other than having the Nigerian one, at some point, maybe not immediately, but at some point we could do something in Delaware because you're already thinking about the fact that they will need to approach investors, right? And yeah, sorry. And then again, because of the kind of capital that you're also looking for, it'd be easier for you to be there, incorporated there, because you're looking for USD again. Because if you raise in a local currency, it might be difficult for you to then to help your expansion initiatives and all of that. Somebody has a question.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, so maybe my corporate law is a bit rusty, so I'm still trying to get the general structure. Oh, okay. My name is Dan Whiskey.
Do you like whiskey?
Oh well. So
Yeah.
I was trying to ask, when you say have the major
Offshore
shareholders,
entity.
shareholding
Yeah.
structure and everything in the
Yeah.
outside jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So when you are doing the operations, or don't the operations in the local jurisdiction have or will have its own incorporation, something like that? So how do you go about it? So because I trying to get what you mean or what you said when you say, oh, there are 4 persons, like you gave the example, and then if you say you are not doing that one, you have to do for every jurisdiction you go to. So when you have that general one outside, what then happens? How do you incorporate the operations one? Do you not also need these same 4 persons, as it were? So I say maybe my corporate law is rusty, so maybe you
It's
can
fine.
explain a bit more. Thank you.
Fine.
So that I understand, and then when I'm advising a startup, I understand the reason why I'm telling him, you know what, this is a better route
Yeah.
than just doing it
Okay,
local.
so let me be a little bit more granular here. So you is no board. So you have permit me, I'll just use you guys here again. Sorry. So you have this four. So you have 4 of them as shareholders in ABC Nigeria Limited, right? And then you then decide that it would be good to have an offshore entity, probably in Delaware, right? So you then say, so when you incorporate that company in Delaware, these guys will still be the shareholders, 4 of them, right? So what I'm trying to explain is that 4 of them are shareholders in ABC Delaware, right? Then ABC Delaware would then be the only shareholder in ABC Nigeria Limited, right? So it's a funnel. So it's from the top. So shareholders hold shares in ABC Delaware. ABC Delaware, because of newcomer, right? You can have one shareholder. So that company, and a company can be a shareholder, right? We agree. So that company will then be the shareholder in ABC Nigeria Limited. So when you go to another country, you replicate that same thing. So that ABC Delaware, right, will then be the shareholder in ABC Kenya, KE, right? If it's in Uganda, same. If it's in Rwanda, again, subject to the laws. In some of those countries, right, like in Kenya, you need 2 shareholders. So you need to find somebody that holds at least 1 share there. So what that does is that because everything is now centralized in ABC Delaware, everything comes from there. And then, sorry, one last thing. And then when you are now negotiating with your investors, the entity that will enter into the legal agreements that I would explain now will be ABC Delaware. Okay.
Sorry. Please, when I want to ask a question, please use the mic so that everybody can benefit from. Please. Thanks.
Okay, so my question was just to be sure I understand what the sequence is. So from your explanation, the example you gave, so ABC Delaware was incorporated first, or ABC Nigeria Limited?
So it can be either scenario, right? So let me do it again. So let's say that this guy has already incorporated this company, and then he comes to you and says, "Oh, I'm doing this startup. I think I want to raise money, and some of the investors I'm looking at are in North America." So in this scenario, you already have a company, right, in Nigeria, right? So what you do is that you would incorporate in Delaware, right? Then you will make the shareholders in Delaware to be the same shareholders in Nigeria, right? Then transfer the shareholders in Nigeria will transfer their shares to Delaware entity to the Delaware entity. So the Delaware entity now holds all the shares. Um, then the other scenario is, from the get-go, you already do it. You start from the top down. Victoria. Sorry, I know Victoria, so she has a question for me. We
Yes.
we used to work together at
Oh,
Detail, and she was in my tech team. So she wants to either embarrass me or help me out. Yeah.
Mm, Maybe not help you out, but I just wanted to ask. So you said that funding, for example, will be central. Let's say the Delaware Holdco. I also wanted to ask. It's not an incorporation or legal documentation question. When you want to move the fund to the operational entities, what are the ways you can do it? Shareholder loans, things like that. But it's
Yeah.
not at this stage. I just wanted you to explain it because I was curious about that.
Yeah. Victoria. Okay. All right. So when you receive the money at the top, right? And then you want to, you know, bring part of the funds down into the operating entities. Um, what you would typically do is a shareholder loan. So because that Delaware entity is a shareholder in each of these operating entities, right? It's just enter into a shareholder loan with um, with the operating entity. So essentially, I'm giving you this money, use it. We have a shareholder loan agreement. You pay me back, typically with not as high interest as you would have. Again, subject to transfer pricing rules, right, that apply to transactions between related entities. So Victoria, I see why I didn't want to go there, because now I'll start explaining transfer pricing. But yeah, that's essentially how it will work. So in terms of channeling the money or parts of it down to the operating entities. Yes. Okay. So you need to think about the business activities and scope, name of the tech startup, the share capital. Um, Share capital in Nigeria, because if you're going to have a foreign shareholder, you know, what is it now? 10M, 100 million. Which one? The Ministry of Interior sent out a circular that is 100M now. Yeah.
Chude, I just heard from the online guys that they can't hear you clearly. So,
Is it? Can you hear me now? Can someone confirm online?
who is confirming for
Or
us, please?
it's from there. It's from there.
Okay, go
It's
on.
not me. Even though I don't have a loud voice, but
Oh, you have a rich voice.
yeah. So name of the tech startup, is also something you need to think about when you're positioning yourself for funding. Here, what happens here is IP. I know you do IP, right? But what's the name? So example, right? Live scenario that I was trying to invest in a company. So they have a name in an African jurisdiction that they're using, right? Not knowing that in somewhere in Europe, somebody is using that name for a similar, business activity, right? So the question then became, you know, um, because they wanted to expand into that European jurisdiction to sell their products, right? There will then be a confusion, right? So if they had thought about that at the beginning, in terms of, let's say, trademarking it, checking that nobody else is using that name. If you know you're going to go to certain jurisdictions, try and get a trademark registered. If you are using this hold co structure, the hold co can register the trademark and take advantage of some treaties. I'm not an expert in IP, but I know that these are some of the considerations that you should have, right? Name of tech startup. Have you secured the domain name? Some of those things. Then share capital. We discussed that. So now legal documentation and compliance. So here is where lawyers get very busy. Do you have everything that is required when the investors want to do a due diligence on you? Right. So your corporate information and corporate documents, are they up to standard? Do you have everything ready? Do they have the appropriate clauses? Are they properly drafted? International standard again, because the investors that you're looking out for are not necessarily local investors. So it can be a mix, it can be exclusively offshore investors, right? So in my experience, I've just set out some of the fundamentals that you must have at the corporate level, right? So do you have a founders agreement? Do you have shareholders agreement, board charter, vesting agreement, bylaws? So again, depending on the country, right? So for a Delaware entity, you would have your certificate of incorporation. That is not essentially like ours, has some provisions again, right? Do you have your bylaws? Do you have tax clearance, which is a big thing that we all ask for now? Yeah. So then, do you have the right licenses and permits? So you need to advise the startup, right? So if you are doing fintech in Nigeria, do you have the relevant license that applies to the activity that you're doing? The reason why you need all of these things is because if you don't have them as a startup, investors will say, "Oh, you're going to get them first," or there will be a condition precedent, to the investments coming in. So licenses and permits would also include, like data protection type of licenses. In some other jurisdictions, like in Kenya, for example, it's not a big deal, right? So you must have that license. In some countries where you perhaps need to be licensed by their central bank, you also need to get it. Some countries will have a business license that is different from your certificate of incorporation, like a proper business license. You need to have it. So regulatory compliance should remain top of mind, as you continue to operate. Engage the regulators, stay top of mind with them, what's coming in the future so that you can get ahead of it. Just stay compliant. And then build traction. So building traction helps you show value, right? And remain attractive. So let's move. Next slide. So in the slides, so by the time you get them, so what I did is that first video, there's a link on that page, right? So you can watch it. So I've also included a link on this page for documenting, your fundraising activity so that you can understand the two primary documents that I used, right? But I won't play the video now because of time. So I'll just go to the next slide. Because this is a longer video, it's about 19 minutes or so. So can you move to the next slide?
Our online attendees,
Yeah.
yes, have questions. So, I know that you're engaging the house, but should you have anything? I know you mentioned.
There's a session for questions, so maybe we'll take their own questions at that time.
Great. Let's
Yeah.
go.
there's a time allocated for questions. Okay, so here, which is perhaps where I think we should have spent more time, but I mean, we can have that conversation, is, so what I've tried to do is to set out the two principal documents that you would find that are being used, for startups when funding startups. So one is a safe, and the other is a convertible note, right? So these are used at the early stages, and that's what a lot of startups use, and that's what you perhaps should be familiar with, right? For purposes of this conversation, and we can have this part two of this class at some point where we perhaps delve into these terms properly and then talk about priced rounds. So here we use them for, just no priced rounds. So it's just at the beginning. So who knows what a safe is? Full meaning. Okay, it means simple agreement for future equity. Safe. S, simple. A, agreement. F, future. E, equity. So simple agreement for future equity. And then the other is a convertible note. So what are notes? Notes are debt instruments, right? So it's an instrument that just says that we recognize that A gave me $100,000, right? And that I'm to pay back that $100,000. Simple. That's a note. Of course, it will have other terms like the duration, how you pay, if there is interest applicable, etc. But then when it becomes convertible, it then means that there is a feature embedded in that note that if certain things happen or at certain times, right, that money, both principal and interest, as the case may be, will convert into equity in your company. It's as simple as that for convertible notes. You understand? So I will go into some details for convertible notes using these terms that I've enumerated. Then safe, simple agreement for future equity. So what it does is I recognize that the investor has given me $100,000 again, right? And we agree that if certain things happen or at the expiration of a particular duration, that money will convert into equity. That's a safe. The difference is this is a debt instrument, convertible notes. Safe is not a debt instrument. Is essentially an agreement for future equity. So there is no repayment per se for a safe. The agreement is that, I mean, again, subject to negotiation, but, ordinarily, Y Combinator version, as I've put here, when you get the slides, you can click on it. It will take you to the Y Combinator version, which is the version of safes that are being used, post-money valuation. I'll explain that as well. So, basic understanding, that's what these two things are. Is that clear at this point? Because if we don't understand it here, any other thing I say today on these two things, it'll be like Greek. Do we get that? Do we get the difference? Safe, convertible notes. Okay. So I will try to explain safe using some of the parts of the safe, right? In very simple English. I'm not going to be technical. I'll try not to be technical. So at least we have that understanding. Again, like I said, if there's a part two of this, we can dive into like the specifics of each of the provisions, how calculations are done, how it affects your valuation cap, etc. And how it eventually dilutes shareholders in future rounds. Like when you do a Series A, Series B, Series D, it's a lot. There's a lot to discuss, and perhaps we don't have enough time. So again, the safe, how the safe works, right? Like I said, there's something called Y Combinator has, who knows Y Combinator? Yeah. So Y Combinator, they sort of came together and said, you know what, we've been using convertible notes and other agreements for a long time to invest in startups. But the very nature of startups, right, they need something very simple, something that takes little or no time to negotiate, right? So they all came together and, came up with this safe, right? So they first started with a safe that used pre-money valuation, right? So pre-money valuation is what is the value of the company before the raise. So that was what they did with that pre-money valuation. But then, as again, like I said, the ecosystem continues to evolve and develop, right? People then realized that it was easier for investors and even for founders to use post-money valuation, because for founders, it helps them to know how far they are diluted, right, at the point a conversion happens, right? And then for the investors, it helped them to know what the value of their shares would be at the point they convert at, if there's an equity financing. I will explain it. So at the point they do a Series A, simple. What would their value of shares be when there's a conversion? So they now started using post-money valuation safes, right? So pre-money, post-money terminology, they're the same thing. So if your pre-money valuation is $5 million US, right? And then in that round, you're going to raise $1 million US. At the time, so you remember I said pre-money is without the value of the raise, right? Post-money is in addition to the value of the raise. So the pre-money is 5 million, the post-money is 6 million. It's the same thing, really, right? Because you know that it's going to be 6 million when you finish your round. You know that it's 5 million before. Again, the only difference is that the basis of your calculation is different. So it can either be 5 million or 6 million, as the case may be. I won't get into those calculation bits yet. But essentially, the SAFE has a provision on conversion and something called equity financing. So if you look at the SAFE, it will tell you, I'm purchasing, so there's a purchase amount, 100K, agree that, I'll get future equity, right? But then the SAFE now needs to tell you how that conversion would happen, right? So yes, we agree that that money has exchanged hands so that I'll get shares in the future. So how will it happen? You see a part in the SAFE that talks about conversion and equity financing. So what this says, simply put, right, is that if you raise money, if and when you raise money, right, of a certain threshold, right? So let's say that we anticipate that they are going to do a Series A. They haven't done a Series A, and we're coming in with a SAFE. So people that come in with a SAFE or convertible notes are taking the biggest risk at that point because the startup is still very young. Perhaps doesn't even have a product that has been tested or that's built traction. So you're using a SAFE, right? So you then say that, okay, I'm investing in you now because I believe that, you raise more money at some point because you have built traction. So I say, if there's an equity financing means if you raise $2 million US, for example. So now what you've raised is just 100K from me. But at the point you raise 500K or 1 million US, the conversion happens. So remember I said it's safe. The conversion mechanism is tied to timelines or events. So this is an event. An equity financing is an event. So you've raised that threshold, that money, right? It converts. So you then say, how does it convert, right? How do you calculate the conversion? So here, you can introduce what is a valuation cap, a post-money valuation cap. So you say that it will convert. So what you're trying to introduce here is a formula to calculate what your shares would be at the time it converts, right? So you can say that the valuation cap would be, for example, 1 million US, right? So that's what you use to calculate what your price per share would be at the time it converts. So what that does for you is that if there's a valuation cap, typically you'd have used the valuation at the time of that equity financing, right? Which more often than not might be higher than what you've agreed as a post-money valuation cap. So the lower the post-money valuation cap that you've used as opposed to what the actual valuation is at the time you want to convert, means you get more value because the price per share based on the valuation cap that you have used gives you a cheaper price, right? So let's say at Series A, the valuation is that they're going to use like 10 million, right? But you've used a post-money valuation cap of 5 million. It means the price that you'll be getting is 50% lesser than the price that the Series A investors will be getting in the company, which means you get more value for that your investment, right? As opposed to if you are coming in at the same time with the Series A investors, because you'll be getting at a higher price per share. Okay, so just understand it this way. The safe will say, it will convert if there's an equity finance. So if you raise X amount of money, so I've given you $100,000. At the point you raise $500,000, right? There's an equity financing. Equity financing has happened, and then we'll convert, right? The mechanics of conversion is that we have included a post-money valuation cap, right? Meaning, irrespective of what you raise, using whatever valuation at that time in future, the cap that we have agreed is what you use, right? The lower the cap as opposed to the actual valuation at that time, the more value you get as an investor. Simple. Forget the mathematics for now. That's what it is. Yeah, so I don't. Okay. So let's say I don't know if you can see. So the post-money valuation here, right, that you agreed in your safe. If you're using a post-money valuation cap safe, right, you've agreed that you're going to use it's 2 million, right? I'm going into mathematics. So wait, okay. So your valuation cap in your safe is 2 million, right? The purchase amount. So as the investor, you are giving the person $100,000, right? You people agree that this is your post-money valuation cap. Purchase amount 100K, right? And then you agree that your equity financing threshold, right, is $500,000. Do we agree? Do we understand this now? So you've given this person, you are the investor, you've given this person $100,000. Say, in the future, you give me equity. Understood, right? You then say that if you raise 500K, right, I want this money that I've given you to convert into shares. That's what equity financing is. Understood? Okay. So you then say that you want to use a post-money valuation cap, meaning you assume that at that point, things would have happened. They would have used this 100K, the company evolves, the value gets, bigger, better, right? You then say that a combination of all of those factors plus the equity financing value, let's say it's 500, at least 500, everything now becomes 2 million. That's your valuation cap. Post that equity financing. Does it make sense? So that is 500K plus the enhanced value based on operations, your product, everything, right? Plus the new investment, right? You people say that in negotiating this safe, you say that it's your cap for it is 2 million. But in reality, right, it might be more than 2 million. Because what you raise, this new investment, so we've agreed that this is the cap, 2 million for us when we're negotiating. But the new investments that you might get when you're doing your Series A, right, can amount to 5 million, for example. So when you do 5 million plus the value that is enhanced plus 500K, let's say that you are already at 10 million. Do you get? So at the time you do your equity financing round, you are now valued at 10 million, right? So if we did not do a post-money valuation cap, if we not include it in the safe as 2 million, this is what would have been used to calculate this is the amount of shares that this 100K will give me. Right? Is it making sense now with figures? Exactly. So that's what we've done. Yeah, so that's why you are doing that in the safe. So as the investor, negotiation points, you're looking for a lower valuation cap. Because the lower the valuation cap is, right, the more value you get in terms of the shares that convert at post the equity financing, right? But as the startup founder, you're telling them, no, why would you cap it at 2 million? In 1 year, I trust myself, I know my product, right? We're going to be valued at about 10M post money because I know that I'll be able to raise an additional 5M, for example, right? So as the founder, you're pushing for a higher valuation cap, right? As the investor, you're pushing for a lower one because you're taking a huge risk, right? So you want to use a lower one so that you get more value. So the idea is I gave you money when nobody wanted to give you money. So at the time you now become a big boy, you have all this cash inside of you, right? I want the value that I get based on that new valuation to be higher because I took a risk on you, right? So I cannot exchange at the same price per share. So let's say if you then do it, so the price per share that you'd have gotten here, let's say the price per share for 10 million, right, is $10. Just for, hypothetically, right? If you do the calculation, price per share here is 10. So for 2 million, right, you'll be getting a fraction of this 10 because it's not 50, it's 0.25% or thereabouts, right? That's what you'll be getting. So the price per share you'll be getting will be somewhere in the region of $2 if you're using a 2 million valuation cap, which means if this is your 100K, right, it will be 100K divided by 2 as opposed to 100K divided by 10. 100K divided by 2 gives you 50 shares in total. 50,000 shares because it's 100K, right? 100 divided by 10 gives you 10,000 shares, right? So the lower valuation cap is more favorable to the investor because this is the price for the risk that you've taken. So you're getting more shares, more value from your shares than the person that is coming using this round. So these new investors are coming because somebody has taken a risk on you, puts in money, and now you're now valuable, right? So I need to be paid for that risk. The alternative, right, is that you invest this 100K, right? And it's a safe. There's no payback, nothing. And I'll explain the solution events, liquidity priority, etc. The money can just go poof because the guy just squanders the money. The business doesn't do anything. You've lost your 100K, right? So that's the risk because as opposed to a debt, at least you are even going to get repaid. You can go to court and say, you say you're going to pay me back. Give me at least my principal. But in a safe, it can just go, right? So the risk is heightened with a safe, right? Especially if there's no payback mechanism incorporated anywhere. right? So that's why if you use a valuation cap, now most people use a post-money valuation cap so that they can sort of take advantage of this kind of scenario, right? There's also a scenario where you can use something called a discount rate, right? So a discount rate would be, let's say for example, you agree that you use post-money valuation of 2 million and then a discount rate of 20%, for example, right? You would then say that if there is an equity financing, the price per share that you will get upon conversion is the lesser of either if they do a post-money valuation cap or they do a 20% discount on each share price on each one. So here we've done, this is a post-money valuation calculation, right? A PMC, that's post-money valuation calculation here. Then if you're doing a discount will be, 20% of the price, right? 20% of this, 20% of 10, because this is the valuation, actual valuation. 20% of 10 is what? It's still 2. So they are the same thing, right? Let's make it real. If you do 30%, what's 30% of the share price? Yeah. So that's 30% is 3, right? 3 of 10 gives you 7. And this one is 2. So to say the lesser of the 2, what's the lesser of the 2? It's still the post-money valuation. So that's what you use. Yeah. So you can use a combination of post-money valuation cap and discount rates, or you can use only post-money valuation, or you can use only discount rate. But the common one is the post-money valuation cap. You typically won't see only discount rates in safes, but you can see that in convertible notes, which I would explain. Okay. So I mean, maybe at least we understand 50% now, 30%. It's because of the calculations. But the idea is, I think what you should take home is, please can we go back to that slide? What you should take home is post-money valuation cap, right? The lower it is, as opposed to the actual valuation at the time of equity financing, the more value the investors get, right? And the more diluted the founders would be. As opposed to a priced round, because at that point, you even use safe when there is no valuation. You don't even know what the value is at that time. So you are looking at a post-money valuation. So at that point, the business is still very young. They don't really have as much traction. There's a possibility that it just dissolves. The business doesn't do very well. There's a possibility that by the time they think they are ready for a Series A, nobody wants to invest in them because they're looking at them like, your bros down the street are doing something better. Their product is better. I don't like the founders. You guys have been involved in some scandal, So what happens then is that you don't get anything. Yeah. So, yeah. Yes, essentially. You won't allow for a post-money valuation cap, right? Not possible. Because you don't have anything. You need money, right? So that's why I said you need to be a business lawyer, right? Which is you think about to be real with yourself, right? If you don't accept some of these protective mechanisms, right? Nobody's going to fund you because they're taking a huge risk. So how they protect themselves? So what you should be trying to do is negotiate what the value of that protection is, right? So you should be able to, at some point, do this type of calculation as a lawyer and say, because when you're negotiating, we have those conversations. I'll tell the person that, okay, why we've chosen this threshold is because of this, if the share price is going to be this, I think that we should get this. You need to have those conversations and understand how you arrive at these figures when you're doing that negotiation, because you document it. You might have business people beside you, but you need to understand it because you document it. And then, for example, right, I'm a lawyer at my firm, at the investment firm, right, director of legal. But at the same time, I double as an investment manager, right? So before, when I was even a partner at Detail, I'll be honest with you, I didn't even know all these things. I've learned these things in the last, 6 months or thereabouts, right? So when I was a lawyer in a law firm, I mean, you do the documents, but you have the people on the other side who are telling you, some of these things. You might just put a square bracket and say, investment team should please confirm, things like that. But when you move to that side, you need to have that understanding, no matter how basic, right? It helps you in that conversation with the people on the other side. It helps you when you're a startup lawyer, talking to people on the other side. Yeah. So liquidity event here is, the SAFE would say what will happen if there's a liquidity event. Liquidity events would typically be if there's a winding up, or if there's an IPO, an acquisition or an IPO, right? It will tell you how it will convert. Sorry, it will tell you how you get your money back if you can't get your money back, right? If there's a dissolution event too, that the company just goes bust, it will tell you, the SAFE has standard language, right? Then liquidation priority, it would prioritize who gets what first. At what point you get paid back as a holder of a SAFE. At least what you're looking for at that point is at least your capital, right? That 100K. Many cases you might not get the 100K because some other people who are to receive payments ahead of you, right, would collect money. And if there's nothing left, is what it is. Goes back to the risk element. So it tells you what happens if there's a termination. Then there's a definition section. There are the usual representations and warranties that you have. And then the SAFE is basically, governing law is Delaware, for the reasons that we mentioned earlier. Because most companies that would go to raise funds are incorporated in Delaware. Again, setting up your startup for funding because of things like this. So then we go to convertible notes. How much time do I have left? Omo, how much time do I have left? Yeah. No, 11. But I started late. So you want to 5 minutes? Okay. Question 20. Okay. No, I'll do this in like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Yeah, so that we go to questions. So the next doc is convertible notes. So the reason why I think we'll be quick here is because the same concepts, discounts, valuation cap also apply here. But the difference, like I said at the beginning, is that this is a debt instrument, right? Is essentially saying, I'm giving you $100,000. You pay me back. There's a repayment provision. There's a maturity. But then there's an option for conversion, right? So it will say, we'll convert if there's equity financing. Depends. Some people have different names for it. But the idea is, by the time you raise X amount of money, conversion will happen. And conversion, sometimes they can say it's automatic, that it automatically converts. Sometimes it's optional, right? That the investor has the option to convert. The investor can decide to hold off and not convert at that time because he thinks that the value to get might not be good enough. So it waits, So the question then becomes, how do you convert? So a lot of startups, a lot of investors will use both a discount and valuation cap and say that the lesser of the two. That's example that we did, right, is how it to convert. But the interesting thing to note here is that because there is an interest on the loan, is debt, different from this. No interest here. There's an interest there. So that this 100K, at the points where conversion wants to happen, and again, the interest is compounded most times, right? So at the points where conversion needs to happen, it might not be 100K anymore because you'd have been, compounding interest. You then add it to the principal. So that's the value that will convert. So at the point it's converting, it might have gotten to, 300K, right? So you are converting 300K using either the cap or the discounts, right? So the negotiation point as the startup would be what in this scenario? So let me put the question differently. So if you were the lawyer for the startup and then you have a convertible note, what are the things in that convertible note that you pay attention to and say, I want to reduce or I want to increase, as the case may be? So what do you want to do to the interest rate? Okay, yeah. So you want to reduce the interest rate. You want to do what to maturity? So that's tricky. Let me say why. Remember that your interest is compounding. So the longer your maturity for your notes is two things. So the longer it is, this one will keep going up because it's compounding. So which means at the time there is a conversion, there's a lot of money that is converting combined with the cap or the discount that is being used. So it might not be best for you to make it long, right? But then again, you need to understand when you think you would raise. Again, because conversion is also tied to the threshold of equity financing you receive. How soon do you think you're going to raise? So these are some of the things you need to consider, right? And then you pay attention to what the post-money valuation cap is, right? So these are some of the things that you'll be negotiating. So maturity, so that's timeline. So maturity is, so again, some convertible notes would say that when the note matures, so if the note is for 3 years, so convertible notes, typical period is 18 months to 24 months. In some cases, 36 months, but it's never usually more than 3 years. That's 36 months. So some investors will say if it gets to maturity and you've not raised, so you know how the convertible notes works is, it's two things. Is either you raise money within the period, right? So that the conversion, they can convert. Because the idea is no investor ever wants to be paid back with the notes. What they are looking for is the future value that company will have so that they can convert and take advantage of it. They're not a bank. Do you understand? If you wanted that kind of loan, you'd have gone to a bank, right, with higher interest rates. So what they're really looking for is they want you to be successful, and then raise money so that the conversion can happen, right? So that they key into that value at the points where you raise money. But if that doesn't happen, right, what would then happen is that it gets to the maturity period. Some see notes to say it converts automatically, right? Some of that see notes to say I have the option as the investor to convert if I want to, right? Because sometimes you want to be able to look at that startup and the circumstances and say, you know what, we perhaps can give them 12 more months because they are going to raise money. They're eventually going to be successful, and I don't want to convert yet because I still want to take advantage of that conversion. As opposed to, at maturity, it's either converts automatically and you get a lesser value, or at maturity, you say you must pay back, right? Yeah. So I think that's it for convertible notes and safes for now. We could have gone further to start discussing when you get to that equity financing round, how does it affect your valuation cap? So your valuation cap is, before you raise, you have shareholders who have shares in the company. There's a valuation that is attached to those shares that they hold, right? When they raise money, the valuation changes. The new investors will get value again for the shares that they get, right? So in some cases, the founders, more often than not, the founders will get diluted, right? Means they then begin to hold lesser and lesser and lesser of the company. So the more you raise, the lesser in terms of the shares that you have. But then again, the good thing is, when you raise more and your company is more valuable, they'll say it's better to own 10% of 1 billion than 100% of 1 million, something like that, right? So, but it's also important as lawyers to keep an eye on the valuation cap, because if you don't, you continue to raise money, right? And then at some point, when you eventually do the calculation, when an equity financing happens or the eventual, conversion happens, you then realize that perhaps as between the founders, you have only 10% left. It's also important because you then determine how much of the company you are giving away at each round. Because sometimes some people don't pay attention to the cap, valuation cap. They raise money, one, two. By the time the conversion happens, they do the calculation. They realize they don't have, much more to give to raise. Because you can then find out that you don't own your business anymore at all. It's just a very insignificant stake. So that's the next part of understanding startup funding, which is your valuation cap, how the conversion at each stage affects your valuation cap. When you start doing priced rounds, how do you calculate the value that goes to the investors in those priced rounds? So priced rounds would be, at that point, you actually know what the valuation is. So you're entering into that conversation knowing what your valuation is, and immediately the investors know the amount of shares that they're getting. At that point, you're having that conversation. So that's investing in priced rounds. So safes and convertible notes are for startups, and the kind of startups that we typically engage with at the stage that they're at. Okay. I think I'll stop here. So questions online and here. So within the next 5 minutes. So Omo would coordinate.
Okay. First, can we please give
He
him
will
an
coordinate.
applause? Thank you. So I have a few questions from the online folks. I don't want to read this out because the person was like, "Okay, we are beginners. These things you are saying." But the person wants you to explain post money valuation cap, and then someone else doesn't even understand the entire thing, safes and convertible notes put together. I think you should just do the more questions. I'm not clear on how a lower post money cap valuation cap under safe results in higher value, that's ROI, for investor and more dilution for startups. If the post money valuation cap is to anticipate and predict how the business will perform within a time frame, shouldn't the investor be bound by the anticipated valuation even when the startup then values beyond that, my brother, after the set time frame? So I don't know if you can put this together.
Okay, so
It
let me
says,
just.
I thought the purpose of post money valuation cap is to reduce what the investor would be entitled to. Does that help?
So is the
Opposite.
so let me just do a recap.
They didn't see our calculation.
Yeah, the calculation.
It's like some people here too don't even understand not to talk of. The camera was showing the calculation. Sorry, Michael. One else, please. Michael, let's have you.
Okay, so let me start with safes and convertible notes. So simply put, right? Just as a recap,
One else, please. One else, please.
as a recap, um, so generally the idea around this training, startup funding, is understanding the different kinds of sources of finance for startups. Who are the people that you can go to raise money. Then understanding the terms, the stages, pre-seed, seed. When you go to venture capitalists, so the Series A, B, C, D, then you understand IPO, right? You understand how to position yourself to receive startup funding, which is where we talked about the business structure, the things you need to consider, right, as a lawyer setting up that structure. We talked about the legal compliance and legal documentation. So now you know the things you need to have as a startup so that investors, when they approach you, right, would see that you are investment ready, right? You've done your IP things. You've sorted out issues relating to your employees, right? You've done non-compete agreements, so essentially saying that they cannot leave your startup and go and do the same thing and be competing with you. So you've done all those things that make an investor comfortable to invest in you, right? The next thing is then how do we document the money that I'm receiving, right? Somebody's going to give me money. I need to have an agreement so that we know what will happen with that money, what is expected of me, and what the investor is expecting to receive. We understand everything up to that point, right? Okay. So I then said, in terms of documentation, there are two common documents, legal agreements that are used for startup funding at the initial stage. You have simple agreement for future equity, and then you have convertible notes. Right? We get it. Okay. Simple agreement for future equity is not a debt instrument. It's an agreement that says, give me 100,000 naira today, right? Then, if certain things happen or at certain points in time, right, that 100,000 naira that you are giving to me will convert into a specific amount of equity. So let's say at that point it might convert to 20% of your company. That's what a safe is. Give me money. If certain things happen or at a certain time, that money that you have given to me will convert into shares in my company. Right? That's a safe. So a convertible note, on the other hand, is a debt instrument. Debt meaning loan, right? I've come to you, give me 100,000 naira, right? In that note, it says I'm going to charge interest on that 100,000 naira at 5%, for example, right? And that the duration that I'm giving you this loan is 3 years, that's 6 months, right? So that's the maturity period. It matures at 36 months, right? But beyond that, I've now said that this 100K that I've given to you, 100,000 naira, right? If certain things happen, right, or at certain points in time, this 100,000 naira that I've given you will, yeah, so that 100,000 naira that I've given you, again, depending on the terms of that agreement, let's assume that we've agreed that 100,000, 5% interest, right? That 100,000 together with the 5% interest that has accumulated for the period of that note, so let's say 36 months, assuming that no conversion happens, that it will convert into equity within that, for that period, right? So this is convertible notes, right? It's called C notes, right? So the loan amount here is 100,000. So we've agreed that I'm giving you 100K. The interest on this 100K is 5% interest, right? And then we said that the maturity date, maturity means the period when the loan becomes mature for repayment, right, is 3 years, which is 36 months, right? So ordinarily, this is a note, a debt instrument, like a loan agreement, right? This is what it is. But what makes it a convertible note is that you then have provisions on when conversion will happen, right? So you're saying that I want to be able to convert the value of this, right, into shares in your company, right? So you then say, at what point will this conversion happen? Two things. This conversion can happen, one, when you raise, so if you raise, let's say when you raise 500,000 naira. So if you go to investors, after I've giving you these convertible notes, if you go to investors, right, and investors at that point come together, they now say, oh, we are willing to give you 500K. At the point that you raise 500K, I have the option, that's C note to say, I have the option as the investor to say that I want to convert this money that I've given you, right, into shares in your company at that time, right? So how do you calculate what the shares would be at that time is where the concept of valuation and discount rates comes in. So do you understand at conversion? So conversion, when you raise this money, I want to be able to convert, or, you know, at maturity, I want to be able to convert, right? So you've established in that your C notes that there are two periods, there are two options, conversion options, so to speak. So we understand that you've collected loan. There's an interest on the loan, right? You understand that this interest is 5%. The loan is for 3 years. Understood. But then I've said that instead of you repaying me, I want to have the option to say that whatever has accrued under that loan, I want to be able to convert, right? So the question is now, I've decided I want to be able to convert. The question is now, okay, when we are converting, what are you converting? How do you want to convert it, right? So people will now say, I want to introduce two mechanisms here to help us determine how we want to convert. So here, remember, is 100K, 5%, right? So when you want to convert, if the person has raised 500K, you then say you want to use a post-money valuation cap, right? So some C notes to say post-money valuation cap. So post-money valuation cap is, so post-money valuation cap equals, right, the pre-money valuation plus the money that has been raised, the investment amount that has been raised. At that point, you want to convert. Does that make sense? So do we know what post-money valuation is now? So the post-money valuation is your pre-money valuation. So pre-money valuation is what was your company valued before this 500,000 naira is coming in. So let's say your company at that time, your company is valued at, so you gave the person 100K. Maybe the founders had put in another 100K. So the company is valued at 200,000 at that time. That's your pre-money valuation. So that's your money, 100,000 as founders, plus the investors' money, 100,000 naira, right? So your pre-money valuation is 200,000 naira, right? So pre-money is your valuation before this 500K that you are going to raise, right? So your post-money valuation is then 200K plus 500,000, right? Is that clear up to this point? So we understand what that post-money valuation is. So your post-money valuation then becomes 700K, right? So, but at the time so this is your post-money valuation, not the cap, sorry, right? So at the time you raise that 500K, your post-money valuation is 700,000 naira, right? That's your post-money valuation. If you use this post-money valuation, right, divided by the amount of investment, right, 100K, right, add the interest. But let's forget the interest for now to make the calculation easy. Forget the interest. Let's just say that is 100K you want to convert, which would also help us for the safe. It's the same concept, right? You then say, okay, so you then say 700. You're trying to get the price per share, right? Because you want to know how much this your 100K would give you in terms of shares, right? The amount this 100K will give you if there was no investment is different from the amount it will give you now that there is an investment. That's why you're using post money, right? So the calculation price per share would be your post money valuation, right? 700,000, right? Divided by how much did you put in? 100,000. What does that come to? 7 naira. So your price per share is what? 7. This is your post-money valuation. Ordinarily, as an investor, this is what you would have paid, price per share. So it will now be, this is price per share, right? This times this will give you the number of shares that you can get. So this is the price per share that you'll be paying. So this price per share, so is 100K divided by 7 will give you the number of shares. So this price per share, right? We agree, 7, right? So if you now want to get the number of shares that you actually get when it converts, right? Number of shares, it will be your 100,000 that you've put in. Remember, we are forgetting the interest for ease of calculation, right? Divided by this price per share. What does that give you? 100,000 divided by 7. Can someone do it? Let's use your phone. I don't have my phone. So that we have actual figures, so it's clear to everybody. Huh? Okay, let's just say, let's round it up to 6. 14,286 shares is what you get. Right? It's clear if we use the post-money valuation alone. So you've entered into an agreement. You say that, oh, the price, the number of shares I want to get is determined by the post-money valuation. That's what you have in your convertible notes. This is what you get. Number of shares when the conversion happens, when you raise 500K. Is that clear? Right? So we know that the price per share is 7 naira. Number of shares you get is this. But then, the idea here is that why would I be buying the shares at 7 naira? Me, as the convertible note holder. Because see the 7 naira, right? The people who are bringing this 500K, this is the same thing they are going to use. Right? So they will use this post-money valuation divided by the number of shares that they are, divided by their investment. So it will be 700K divided by 500,000, right? Which is what they are bringing in. The idea is that yeah, so you've come in very early, right, to invest in this company. Why should you pay the same price as somebody who is just coming in now, bringing in this money? Because you're using the same valuation, right? You're using the same valuation. So you are on the same commercial terms with somebody who is just coming in. You understand? Right? That's what this formula would do for you. But then you now say as the investor and say, no, I don't want my conversion to happen on the same terms as somebody who is coming after. Because that person is coming after when I've taken the risk, the company is better, right? You then say that, no, in addition to all these other terms that we agreed, conversion, maturity, interest, loan, right? I want to say to you that I want to set a post-money valuation cap as the investor. I want to say that irrespective of what your valuation is at that time, right, I will use a post-money valuation cap of 300,000. Remember here, the post-money valuation at the time the equity financing happens is 700K, right? So I want to use a lesser valuation, because if I use a lesser valuation, the price that I'll pay per share instead of 7 naira will reduce. So let's do the calculation, right? So do you understand the reason why you're doing a cap on that valuation as the investor? Because you don't want to pay the same price to get shares. So the higher the price of the share, right, the lesser the number of shares. And we'll do that calculation here now. So 300K, you agree that this is what you want to use as the cap, right? So what formula did we use here to calculate the price per share? By the investment that you brought in, Abi. So now, if you use 300K, right, so the price per share will be 300K, divided by, how much did you put in? 100K. What does that give you? 3 naira. You see the difference? So which means if you did not do a cap, right, the price per share at the time you want to convert will be 7 naira. But if you had included a cap, the price per share that you get is 3 naira. What's the difference now? So if the difference in price per share with a post-money valuation alone divided by difference in price by post-money valuation cap is 7 naira minus 3 naira equals 4 naira. So it means that you have saved a value. So this is the value saved or value gained, as the case may be, depending on how you want to look at it. So it means that when you are now converting, right, instead of converting at 7 naira, you are converting at 3 naira. So now let's check what's the number of shares that we'll get.
3 naira divided by
100. So it's 100,000
divided by 3 naira.
Exactly. So number of shares is what? 100K, right?
Yes.
Divided by 3. What does it give you?
Wow.
33,000. 334. Okay, you round it down, Abby. Okay. So I guess the point, irrespective of what that last figure is, the point is that if you don't have a valuation cap as an investor, you don't negotiate it. See here, you get 14,000 plus shares. Here, when you use a valuation cap, what do you get? So which is better for you as the investor? Okay. So when you use a post-money valuation cap, so that's why investors use it to say, I need to enjoy the benefits of coming in early, benefits from the risk, right? Does this make sense to everybody now? Okay.
Okay.
So this is one mechanism post-money valuation cap, right? As that investors will use, because you don't want to do at the same price that the other investors are getting. The other thing is a discount rate, right? So you can say that at the time you want to convert, right, you are converting at a discount of 20%, for example. So simple. By the time you do price per share, it's 7 naira, right? On this round with post-money valuation, no cap. You're not using a cap, right? If you do a discount of 20%, so it will be 20% of 7 naira. So the discount rate is 20%, right? So the price per share you are going to use is that 7 naira that you first calculated, right? 20% of it. So it's 20% off that price. So what's 20% off 7 naira? So if you do 20% of 7 naira minus that figure tells you what the price per share will be. 5.6 is what the price per share will be. So 20% of 7 is 1.4. Okay. So the price per share will be 5.6. Right? So in that C note, you say, so first of all, you can use post-money valuation cap, right? This is what your price per share will be. Right? 4 naira, right? Where is it? Okay, 3 naira, sorry. I'm out of time. 3 naira, right? If you use a discount of 20%, this is your price per share. But in both scenarios, you are better off than using 7, right? So you in some C notes, investors will use one or the other, right? So they will choose one in that note. In some other C notes, the C notes will say they will use either 3 naira or 5.6, whichever is lesser. Yeah. So it will say we are using a post-money valuation cap of this or a discount rate of this, whichever is lesser. I guess the reason is, in some cases, maybe the higher the price per share, the more advantage a discount rate does for you. We can do that mathematics. But the point is, you choose, which of them works for you. So the lesser. So know that in C notes, you can have post-money valuation cap alone, discount rates alone, or you can have both in your C notes, and whichever is lesser is what to be used, because the lesser the share price, the better it is for you as the investor. Flip side, if you are the investor, you negotiate accordingly because you know what it will do in terms of dilution. Is that clearer? So the same concept, apply it to the safe.
We understand now. That you are clapping. Great, great. So since we get it here, can I have Bolaji Oloto and then Francis Elechi ask a question? Quick question. That is not on this, because we expect that you understand this. But if you don't, let us know the exact gray area you want. Thank you. Please unmute yourself. Unmute yourself and ask your question. Thank you. Mobolaji Oloto, please. Ladies first. Olotu, apologies. Mobolaji Olotu. Yeesh. Great.
Thank you for having us. And thank you so much, Mr. Ofili, for the presentation. My name is Mobola Diolutu. I'm a Nigerian lawyer, and I'm currently doing my LLM in business law. So this is really central to what I intend to do in a few years, startup financing. My question is on positioning for funding. There was a section where you were speaking about how business structure in Delaware, which is like the preferred jurisdiction for setting up companies. I understand that in the US, unlike Nigeria where we have just the limited liability companies, I understand that in the US there's C corps and there's S corps. Is there any difference? Is there a preferred structure between those two that you would say investors would be prefer would be more inclined to invest in? So if you have a C corp as opposed to having an S corp. Then just secondly, there was a time
Can we take only one, please? Please. Okay, go on, go on.
Thank you. This is our first avenue to ask, so thank you. There was a 10-minute gap where we were cut off from the online presentation, and that was just after you spoke on incorporation. I believe you were maybe talking about, because your slides touched on the name of the company, so maybe you were speaking about IP in that instance. And I later on you mentioned something about not compete and employees. So if you can please just do a quick recap for us on that. That's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So for your second question, the recording will be sent to you. Is that okay, ma'am? The recording will be sent to you. So let Mr. Ofili just go straight to your first question. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you
C
very
corp,
much,
S corp.
Mobolaji.
Uh-huh.
Very good question. So the reason why I perhaps did not talk about the types of entities that you can do in Delaware is, again, not everybody has that exposure to the U.S. corporate law system. But anyway, I'll just say that what you typically find, right, is you have something called an LLC, you have S corp, and then you have C corp, like she has said, in terms of the types of companies that you can have in Delaware. So an LLC is a, limited liability company. So you don't see many companies use LLCs, tech companies. What you find is that most of them are corporations. So whether it's a C corp or a S corp actually depends on preference and a consideration of the tax um, implications of using either of them. But I know that I see more C corps, right? That's what people use. So those are the three ones you typically find, three types, and most people use C corps for tax reasons.
Please, can we have Mr. Francis Elechi? Mr. Francis Elechi, please introduce yourself and kindly go straight to your question. Straight to your question. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Francis. I work for Sterling Law Alliance for Focus, and we have an office in Abuja. You were actually a clarification, not a question, when we're talking about the caps. I was actually going to, but I think you've taken care of it now. Because, I mean, you are looking at the advantage of having a value cap, you know, and it seemed that a lot of people didn't quite understand what the advantage was for an investor. So I think that matter has been resolved. I think I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any question online and here? Okay, we have a lady. Please introduce yourself, your firm, and then let's go on with your question. Straight to the point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Titilayo Aino Scott. I work with Akila Wanajomo. I wanted to ask, from the notes you gave us on the safe notes and the convertible notes, I've talked to a funder who says he doesn't do safe at all. If I'm advising an investor, why would I advise an investor to do a safe? Because it seems to me like the convertible notes has all the advantages because of the interest and the option to either convert or to take the money back. So is there any advantage in the safe for the investor? I know it's advantageous to the startup.
Yeah, so you're correct. So for example, as an investor or someone that works for an investor, I don't like safes, right? I prefer to use convertible notes. and which is convertible notes are what have been used widely, generally. Investors, VCs, startups, everybody understands C notes. But at the same time, right? Like I said, the startup ecosystem has evolved a lot, right? With the role that Y Combinator plays, um, they've come they've come to the realization that convert safes as opposed to convertible notes, right, are easier to negotiate. They're easier to use, easily understandable. They also um, are startup friendly, right? In that a startup understands what it is, and there's less pressure on you, so to speak, with a safe. The idea is that they want to help you grow, etc., etc. But C notes afford the investors more protection, right? Because of the features, conversion, you can get your money back because it's a loan, together with the accrued interests. Um, and then there are other protective mechanism provisions that you typically find in a loan, like events of default, all those things you can include in your C note. So your C notes is a wider legal instrument in terms of incorporating other provisions. The safe is standard. You don't negotiate it as such because it's the standard template that people use. So yes, most investors prefer C notes, but then again, because um, things are changing, you have some startups that are stronger, they have better prospects. A lot of times, it's a business decision as well, depending on what you've seen from your financial due diligence, what you foresee would be the prospects of this startup, etc. You can then use safes, and safes are easier for investors as well, who are angel investors, because it's easier to understand. Not everybody's a lawyer that can go into those deep technicalities. Yeah.
And with
So
that,
we
we
do startup funding part two, Abi, at this rate. So just to say that I initially did not want to go into this valuation cap and all of these calculations because it takes it, it takes more time to understand it, and you need a more detailed approach. You need more time essentially, and you need to carry people along. So the idea was to restrict the scope of this just to the basic things so that you can understand when people are having those conversations, you know what to look out for. Um, but fortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, we went into this. And I hope that it's been useful in terms of the calculations. I hope that that puts things in perspective other than just having the principles discussed here. And you can reach out to me if you need to understand this a little bit more in detail, right? Yeah. I don't know if I left my details, but he has, can reach me on
Yes.
LinkedIn, etc. Yeah.
Please, first of all, a round of applause for Chudi, please. So this has been very instructive for me, particularly because I'm also in a position where I'm a founder as well. I have what I call a legal tech startup, and I'm bootstrapping. So that's a bit tough. So maybe we'll talk about how I can get funding very, very soon. But Chudi works out of Nigeria a lot. So he's only in Lagos a few times a year, and we're just lucky to have him here today. So please, another round of applause for him being here. All right, guys. So this is the end of our first session. Right now, we're going to have a tea break, and it's just going to be a short tea break because we shot into our tea break time during the first class. Short tea break, and we'll be back here for the next session. David Sinoturu, the speaker for the next session, is literally around. So yes, when you come back from tea break, we'll just jump right into second class. Thank you so very much. And to our participants, online, thank you so much for joining us. Please come back in another 30 minutes. That's the length of the tea break, and we're going to be here again. Thank you so much.
just 1 minute. Today would like to do a quick selfie with everybody, but it's a grouped selfie. You stand here and do a selfie. Please let's quickly and kindly accommodate him. There is a library, or bookshop rather, um, present and online. You can get many of the resources, particularly some of the facilitators. For instance, Mr. Olumide Babalolawun will be having later today. He has some of his products here. I'm sure he will come again. When he comes, he will announce. So yes, Chude wants to do a selfie. This is not a selfie now. It's not a Wi-Fi. Yeah. Okay. Are you catching? Online guys, we'll have a selfie with you too. Just hold on. Where we can see. Bros. Puts us back with the online audience. Yeah. So we know that this, with the online audience. Great. Do you want to? Your best face.
Well, I like the rest of the class.
Great. All right, with the online guys.
All right, guys. Thank
Screen.
you. Yeah, you're online, guys. If you're online, please can you turn on your camera so you can show in the pictures, so your faces can show. If you're online, just
Please
turn
turn
on
on your cameras
so that
we
we can see your faces.
when you're meeting Mr. Chude on another level, you say, I was in that selfie. Okay, please, break is 30 minutes. There's an usher that will direct. You could use the elevator or the stairs.